Forget everything you thought you knew about cops and robbers. What if I told you that the biggest heists, the most daring scams, and the bloodiest gang wars would have been impossible without the very people who wore a badge and swore to uphold the law? Today, we will tear back the curtain on the most shocking deals between the police and the mafia. This is a story of a double game, of betrayal, and of money soaked in blood. Watch until the end, and you'll learn how the system that was kept silent for decades really worked. Picture America in the 1920s. Prohibition. Alcohol is outlawed, but people's thirst hasn't gone anywhere. And on this thirst, powerful empires grew like wildfire. Their name, the Mafia. But no Don, no Godfather could hold on to power without loyal allies. And these allies weren't sitting at a card table in a speakeasy. They were in police precincts, patrolling the streets in blue uniforms. This wasn't just a simple bribe. It was a symbiosis, a deadly dance of predators. The Mafia paid the cops a tax on tranquility. A wad of cash in a patrolman's pocket meant he didn't notice a truck full of bootleg whiskey. A larger sum to a detective ensured that the murder investigation of a rival would hit a dead end. It was a system that permeated cities like a cancer. The king of this world was without a doubt Al Capone. Chicago in his era is a living illustration of our story. Capone didn't just bribe cops, he owned them. His ledgers recorded payments to hundreds of officers, from beat cops to captains. The police would warn him about raids, lose evidence, and even eliminate his enemies using the arm of the law. The city was suffocating in the iron grip of this alliance. Capone created an entire shadow government. When he needed to solve a problem, he didn't make threats, he just called his guy at the local precinct. Imagine that power. You can commit any crime, knowing that the people who are supposed to catch you are actually on your payroll. It was absolute power, built on the fear and greed of men in uniform. But how did this system work from the inside? The Mafia had its code of honor, omerta, the law of silence. Betrayal was punished by death. Corrupt cops developed their own unwritten code, the blue wall of silence. They covered for each other. An honest cop who tried to go against the system became an outcast. Backup wouldn't arrive for him. He'd be set up, and sometimes he just disappeared. One of the most vivid examples is the famous French Connection case. In the 60s and 70s, huge shipments of heroin flowed from Marseille to New York. This scheme was protected not only by corrupt officials, but by entire police departments. Detectives Sonny Grosso and Eddie Egan, who inspired the movie's heroes, faced incredible resistance from within their own system. Their colleagues leaked information to the Mafia, sabotaged operations, and destroyed evidence. Grosso and Egan were lone wolves inside their own pack. They didn't know who to trust. Every phone call could be tapped. Every partner could be a traitor. This story perfectly shows just how deep the Mafia's roots had grown into law enforcement agencies. Let's travel to the heart of New York City, ruled by the five families: Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno. Each family controlled its own territory and its own business, from racketeering and illegal gambling to construction and waste management. And each family had their people inside the New York Police Department, the NYPD. Officers on the Mafia's payroll received envelopes of cash every week. In return, they overlooked illegal casinos, bookmaking operations, and brothels. They would tip them off about upcoming raids, allowing the mobsters to cover their tracks. It was a perfectly tuned machine where every cog, from the capo to the street patrolman, knew his role and his price. The Mafia leaders were untouchable. John Gotti, the Teflon Don, head of the Gambino family, evaded justice for years. His lawyers were the best, but his main defense was his network of informants in the police and the FBI. They warned him about wiretaps and about witnesses ready to testify. Gotti laughed in the face of the law because he had bought its representatives. But every system has a breaking point, and that breaking point's name was Frank Serpico, a cop in the NYPD, honest to the bone, who in the late 1960s could no longer tolerate the rampant corruption. He saw his partners taking bribes, turning a blind eye to crime. He tried to fight it from the inside, but he ran straight into that blue wall of silence. No one wanted to listen to him. He was seen as a dangerous weirdo, a traitor to the family in blue. Realizing the system was rotten to the core, Serpico took a desperate step. He testified to the New York Times. It was an information bombshell. The whole world learned what was happening behind the walls of the most famous police department in the world. The fallout was colossal. The Knapp Commission was formed to investigate police corruption. Dozens of high-ranking officers were fired or jailed. But for Serpico himself, it came at a terrible price. During a raid, he was shot in the face, and his partners were slow to call for help. He miraculously survived, but was forced to leave the force and the country. The story of Serpico is a story of one man's courage against a rotten system. He proved that even a single warrior can start a battle. His actions inspired many and showed that the light of honor can break through even the thickest darkness of corruption. He became a legend, a symbol of an unyielding fighter for the truth. While this internal cleansing was happening, the federal government struck from another angle. The RICO Act was passed, the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. This law allowed the FBI to prosecute the Mafia, not for individual crimes, but as a single criminal enterprise. Now, a boss could be jailed for the crimes of his soldiers. This was the beginning of the end for the old-school Mafia. Using RICO, prosecutors like Rudolph Giuliani managed to put the heads of all 5 families behind bars during the famous Mafia Commission trial in 1986. It was a devastating blow. The system that held New York in fear for decades began to crumble. Police informants could no longer save the bosses. So why did cops do it? Was it just about the money? Not entirely. It was an intoxicating cocktail of power, fear, and adrenaline. For many officers, it was a way to feel like part of something bigger, to become a player in the underworld. They lived on a knife's edge, taking a slice of the criminal pie and feeling like they owned the streets. Imagine a young cop who sees his senior partners driving expensive cars and wearing watches he could never afford on his salary. He's offered a chance to get in on the action. At first, it's a small favor, looking the other way. Then it's a warning about an inspection. And before you know it, you're in over your head, and there's no way out. The Mafia never lets go of those on its hook. Legendary stories were born in this cauldron. For instance, the story of the Mafia cops, Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa. These 2 NYPD detectives worked for the Lucchese crime family for decades. They weren't just informants, they were the Mafia's personal hitmen. Using their badges, they kidnapped and murdered the family's enemies. It was absolute evil, hidden behind a blue uniform. They received $4,000 a month just for information, and tens of thousands for every wet job. They leaked data on witnesses who were later found dead. They framed innocent people. Their story represents the lowest depths of betrayal, an example of how protectors of the law can turn into the most vicious monsters.
They were exposed only years later, when a mobster made a deal with the prosecution. Their trial in 2006 shocked America. It was proof that the most dangerous wolves can hide in sheep's clothing, or rather, in the shepherd's clothing, meant to protect the flock. They were sentenced to life in prison. These stories are not just crime tales, they are lessons. Lessons about how easily power corrupts, and how thin the line is between good and evil. A system where honesty becomes a vice and betrayal becomes the norm is doomed to self-destruct. Both the Mafia and the corrupt police eventually collapsed under the weight of their own sins. The streets remember everything. They remember the gleam of expensive mob cars driving past indifferent patrolmen. They remember the whispers in dark alleys where cash was exchanged for information. They remember the fear in the eyes of honest people who knew there was nowhere to turn for help when the law and the lawless were working together. That energy still hangs in the air of the old neighborhoods of Chicago and New York, the energy of risk, big money, and instant death. It was an era when men built empires on violence and cunning, and their greatest weapon was not a Thompson submachine gun, but a dirty cop willing to look away at the right moment. This was their golden age. By studying these stories, we see that the fight never truly ends. There will always be those willing to sell their honor for a stack of cash, and there will always be people like Serpico willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. It's an eternal conflict that defines the face of our streets and our lives. We see that even the most powerful criminal syndicates, which seemed invincible, collapsed like houses of cards when brave people within the system were willing to say no. The law, even if it is slow and cumbersome, eventually finds a way to cleanse itself and strike back. This is motivating. It shows that even in the darkest situation, there is hope. That strength of spirit and loyalty to one's principles can shatter any wall of corruption and lies, no matter how solid it seems. The most important thing is not to be afraid and not to be silent. It is silence that provides the soil in which evil grows. Today's mafia is not the same. It has been weakened, its leaders are in prison. The police have gone through numerous purges and reforms, but does that mean the problem has disappeared? Of course not. The methods change, but the essence remains. The temptation of easy money and power is eternal, and our job is to remember these lessons so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. The history of these shocking deals is not just a story about the past. It's a warning for the future, a warning that we must always be vigilant, demand honesty from those in power, and not turn a blind eye to injustice, because the darkest chapters in history begin with our silent consent. This battle for the soul of the city will never be over. I hope this story got your blood pumping. If you want more deep dives into the real criminal underworld, where life is on the line, subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and write in the comments which story shocked you the most. If this video gets 5,000 likes, I will immerse you in the neon world of the Yakuza and tell you about their secret ties to the Japanese police. See you next time.